Hey everyone, Rob B here with Rob D, and yes, you are listening to the Property Podcast. You haven't misclicked your podcast app. This week, you need to understand the pension crisis. Do not turn off, please. Stick with us. You'll see why soon.
Yes, hello. Welcome to the Property Podcast. Thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning into what's inadvertently part 3 of the Doom and Gloom trilogy. We've talked about mistakes, we've talked about risks, and now we're talking about the pension crisis. Well, what's happened to us over Christmas? I don't know what happened to make us so jaded.
Did we not get what we asked for? Is that what it is? And we're just taking it out on the world? I'm not too sure. But no, I think these topics, although they may sound doom and gloom, we're turning them around each week. Well, we've got a good job on our hands this week turning around the pension crisis, we'll see. But they're so important to understand, because if you understand the doom and gloom, then you can go and chase the positivity and avoid the doom and gloom. Hope that makes sense, but by the end of the podcast, it should. So this is a meaty topic. So should we jump straight into our news story?
Yeah, let's. On a doom and gloom theme, we've kind of got a couple of related stories that link us into the main topic. So firstly, I'm sure it won't have escaped people's attention if they've walked past a TV screen or opened a newspaper that the stock market is not doing particularly well. On the day that we are recording this, the FTSE 100 closed at 5549, which is a gigantic fall from where it was just a couple of months ago. And that obviously ties into people's pensions. And on the pensions front, the main story that you dug out from the Express, I think this is the first time we've had a news story from the Express, because we don't talk about Diana that much, is the fact that defined benefit schemes are over, Rob. Do you want to talk about this one a little bit more?
Yes, they are over. So final salary, as you probably will know it as, is over. For those who understand anything about pensions, this probably won't come as a shock. I'm talking about the private sector here, or the article is at least, rather than the public sector. And the stats are quite damning. In the FTSE 250, the majority of companies now no longer offer final salary, which, again, if you know pensions, won't come as a shock to you. 20 years ago, that was a very different landscape. Lots of companies used to offer final salary pension schemes. And final salary pension schemes are the golden scheme. They're the ones that you're going to get something out at the end. You know, they are by far the strongest pension schemes. We'll talk about what they are specifically in a few moments. But what really stood out for me, Rob, is these companies have, maybe a few of them still have schemes open. Many of them have got existing schemes they have to service even though they've closed them. But there's 14 companies in the FTSE 250 that their pension deficit, what they've got to make up to pay their employees, is worth more than the company itself. That is terrifying.
Yeah, it is. And I think, time bomb is one of those things that seems to get thrown around. People say everything's a time bomb when it's something scary. But this kind of actually really is. The fact that for all these years, they've been promising something, the people are now living for such a vast amount longer. And so it's just getting worse and worse every year. And it's going to take quite a long time, you'd have thought, to unravel and claw it back. And certainly things aren't going to be getting any more generous from now on.
No, not at all. Right, fasten your seatbelts, everyone. This isn't going to be a comfortable 20 minutes or so, but we'll hopefully teach you what you can do at the end to avoid this. But let's start, Rob. I want to introduce this week's topic because it really was inspired by one of our listeners. And I'm not going to mention names because that's not fair, because I've decided to do this podcast. So basically what happened was that the listener went onto the RMP website, signed up, and of course you will get a few emails, and it won't come as a shock that they are education-based. Continue the theme. One of the emails talks about the pension crisis. And in that email, I stated that the pension crisis is getting worse. And he came back and, you can reply. That's the point of email. That's why we send them. He felt that this wasn't correct and there was possibly scaremongering because of the implementation of the workplace pension, which, if you haven't heard about it, it's a government initiative to auto-enroll everybody in work earning over 10k a year into a pension scheme. I definitely agree this is an improvement, but if we look at this from a medical point of view, if somebody's leg was falling off, it's like trying to fix it with a plaster. It's not going to work. I will explain why, don't worry. But it's unfortunately, it's just not going to be enough. Far from it. We'll discuss it shortly.
Yeah, and there are some really terrifying stats around this. So when last year the pension regime was liberalised slightly so people could get access to their money, there was this whole thing that it would cause a buy-to-let boom because everyone would take money out of their pensions and put it into property. I think it's fair to say this turned out not to be the case because the vast majority of people have very little in the way of pension savings. And when you actually look at the numbers, 80% of people who bought annuities in 2013, which is the last figures we've got, had a pension pot of less than £50,000, and only 4% had pension pots worth over £125,000. That is really not enough. If you don't have income from any other sources, that is not going to get you through your retirement if you're going to live for any length of time, really. So this is the crisis. The fact is that nobody is saving enough for their retirement. And one of the things that is being done to try to remedy that is auto-enrollment. And as you said, Rob, that really is just not enough. So let's put some numbers on that and see why it's not going to be enough.
Well, let's take 65 years old, which is, an age that a lot of people would like to retire at. If you want to secure a pension of £9,000 per annum, only 9,000, so let's keep the numbers really low, you're going to need a pension fund of 270,000. Now, bear in mind what we've just said and how far away everybody we just mentioned is away from that number. To secure that income of £9,000 per annum, you're going to need a fund of 270,000. Now, if someone earning around an average age of 30,000 saves 12% of their pay above 5,600, which is when the auto-enrollment kicks in. So how long have you got to work? If you're 29,000 a year, 30,000 a year, and you put 12% of your pay in, well, to get 9,000 out, you've got to work for 40 years and hope that your pot grows 4% each year as well over inflation and after all costs and charges. So you're going to have to do a lot better than 4% to actually earn it, because after charges and inflation, that's probably going to be more like 8%. So 4% might sound low, but then when you dig back and realise what that number really needs to be, closer to 8, it's actually scarily high. The FTSE is collapsing right now. Long term, actually, I think it'd be fine. But 4% currently, and over the last 10 years, has been a dream. Plus, £9,000 a year? Who's going to live off that? And the auto-enrollment right now, people are at the beginning only going to be investing 2%. So if you want to earn £9,000 a year, you've got to put 12% in when the auto-enrollment will start at 2. You need to earn over 4% after costs and inflation. Do it for 40 years, and you're still going to be living in poverty afterwards. That doesn't sound like a great scheme to me. Rob, can you sell me on it?
No, not really. I mean, my concern with this is, like, you could take the view that anything is better than nothing, but my concern is that it'll almost lull people into a false sense of security. I mean, I think people are very good at having their heads in the sand over this anyway. But if you're auto-enrolled, then there is going to be a significant chunk of the population, I would have thought, who'd be like, it's going to be fine. There's a state pension and I've been enrolled, so I'm saving up now. Everything's going to be fine. But the danger is that people are going to think it's fine, but it's really, really not. I think it's something that's worth being a bit scared about. And we're throwing a lot of numbers around in this episode, but it's kind of necessary to shock people into action. Because, we're both still relatively young. We're a long way from retirement. No desire to retire because we like what we do. It's very easy to just ignore it and sort of think about it as something that's going to be a long way away and it's somehow going to magically sort itself out. But it's not. And more people are going to be finding themselves in this position because, as we said, Rob, the final salary pension is dead.
It is. The final salary pension is dead. So the final salary pension, we'll put a link to go into a lot of detail of what it is, but broad overview, you commit a certain amount of your wage each year over the years, depending on how many years you work and the ratios of the scheme. When you come to retire, you will get a final salary. So you will be paid a salary for each year of your retirement. These are by far the best pensions. But because they are so generous, they are disappearing. And they have all but disappeared, as we've already heard, for the private sector. The public sector changes have already started. And I personally believe in 20 years, and sorry if you're a public sector worker, the final salary scheme will not exist, certainly for new people in the public sector, but it'll probably also be closed off for the remaining people as well. I don't believe the final salary can exist because it just doesn't work on the numbers. I've got a friend, his name's Bobby, he's a policeman, it's a true story, he really is. And 5 years ago, I told him that his final salary pension is at risk and they're going to have to make changes. He said, no, it's protected, there's the unions. 5 years on, I didn't want to be right, but I was. And it's not because I'm a genius, it's because I've just looked at the numbers. It's unsustainable. We can't afford to pay people a final salary. Now, there's all the arguments about why public sectors deserve it and all the rest of it. I'm not really getting into that argument because I'm not really playing a who's right and who's wrong card. I'm just looking at the numbers, and it cannot work, and it will not work. So the final salary pension, I'm sorry to say, and I've got family in the public sector, will not exist in 20 years' time. If there's anything left of it, it'll be a very, very weak and pale shadow of its current self. So it's gone pretty much for the private sector. It's going for the public sector. You need to get your head around this because you are going to be left like everybody else, having to put money in each month and build your pot and see what comes out at the end. And as we've already said, it's not pretty. The numbers you have to get put in for the little you have to get out is actually quite terrifying.
Okay, so this is really scary, but we've all got the state pension, haven't we? So that'll save us. Maybe not. How much is the state pension? I can't actually remember, but I wouldn't fancy living on it, I don't think. I think the aspiration is that you'll be able to basically maintain your standard of living in retirement. In fact, you find yourself naturally spending less money in retirement, so you don't need to be earning as much then as you are now. But the ideal would be that you save during your working life. When you stop working, you maintain the same level of income as you had before. That's the ideal. You don't necessarily need to get to that point, but that's what you want to do. The state pension doesn't really get you anywhere close to that. And the really, really scary statistic is that almost 2/3 of people, so 60%, will have to rely only on the state pension when they retire. And that is truly scary. Another scary thing is that, to mention property actually for the first time in this episode, the fact that people are struggling to buy their own homes means that a lot of people are going to be actually struggling to own a home and have it paid off by the time they retire. So previously, the idea is like maybe you could pay off your house by the time you're 50 or so. By that point, the state pension is still not a lot, but at least your housing costs are effectively paid for. If that's not the case, then the problem's even bigger. And, you know, that over the next sort of 20 years or so, there's going to be a lot of intergenerational wealth being passed down. There are a lot of people who are older, who are sort of rattling around in big houses. They're going to end up getting passed on. There will be wealth kind of coming down, which is going to save a subset of people who are lucky enough to have sort of family money heading their way. But there's a huge number of people who are not going to have that. So if they can't buy a house and pay it off and they're going to be trying to subsist just on the state pension, that is a huge problem. And the research company De Facto have found that just 40% of people are actively planning for their future and saving into a private pension. I think the state pension is kind of a nice top up, but it's not something that you want to be kind of banking your future on. If you're younger, if it's going to be there at all by the time you reach that age.
Well, exactly, because the state pension Bernie Madoff would be proud of. It's a Ponzi scheme. People actually think, and people outside property circles that I know have said to me, oh, but it's okay, I'm putting money into the state pension. You are putting money in, but you're putting it in for people who are retired. This is not some pot you're building up for yourself in the future. You're deluded. It's not. What happens is the state pension is paying for the people who are retired. And you need to hope that when you retire, there are enough working people to pay for your state pension. But here's the problem. Because people are living longer, there are more and more retired people. And the amount of retired people in our country as a percentage is increasing. So there's less working people to pay for the people who are retired. So the government started moving the state pension age up. don't think they're going to stop there. That number is just the beginning. That's not nearly enough. That's going to go higher and higher and higher. And you'll be lucky if you're getting a state pension by 80 if you're under 40 now, because the numbers don't work. People are living longer and it's unsustainable. So if you think you've got to work till, your late 60s now and maybe, or they might push it to 70, think again. It's going to keep going up. It's a Ponzi scheme. You have to put money in to pay for people who are retired now. It's not for your future.
Well, yeah, the thing is, when it was first introduced, I can't remember the statistic, but it's something like people after the age of retirement were living for something like 2 or 3 years on average when the state pension was introduced. And so you can see how the numbers sort of work on that basis. And, you want people to retire, have a nice few years, and then they drop off and you're sorted. But that's a very cruel way of putting it, but it's true. And now when people are living sort of 30 years, clearly the numbers just don't add up, and yet it's being approached in the same way. Obviously, governments have no particular motivation. Any one individual government has no motivation to make the changes that are needed. So really, the retirement age for the state pension probably should have gone up into the 70s already if it was to keep up with what the original intention of it was. But while that's what needed to happen in the long term, any government who's going to be in for 4 or 5 years, are they going to be the ones to do that? No. So that's why things have got to this point where, like you say, it's kind of turned from something that did make sense into a bit of a Ponzi scheme where you need more and more coming in at the bottom without anyone particularly noticing because it's happened so slowly over time. It's kind of like inflation in that sense. It's something very, very important that nobody notices because it happens so slowly.
So why is this happening? Well, there's several reasons. The government keeps meddling with the size of pension pots, the taxes on pensions. There's so many things the government has done to make things worse. They have done some things to improve, but on the majority of the last 20 years, and there's some really good books on this, and I'll link to them in the show notes, the government has really ripped apart the pensions and made them far less attractive than they used to be. Of course, the FTSE isn't doing very well, but actually that's a temporary thing. It's not as bad as it sounds right now. I know you're probably thinking, what? But seriously, I'm not too worried about the FTSE. I think long term, it's actually looking quite positive. The biggest reason, we've already touched on it, it's people living longer. So, as Rob said, if people were expected to live 2 or 3 years before, and now they're living 30, the numbers don't work. So if you're putting into a pension and at the end you buy an annuity, those annuities that used to pay out big chunks when you retire now don't. Now, you don't have to put your money into an annuity, but a lot of people still do. So if you look at those average pension pots, and we looked at the number before, and very worryingly that 80% of people have got a pension pot of 50k or less. Well, let's go to the high end of that number, the 50k. If you're one of those 80%, but you're at the top end of that scale and you've got 50k, if you wanted to retire now, say you're 65, then that would pay out £200 per month. Okay? £200 per month. 10 years ago, it would have paid out more because people weren't living as long. But life expectancies keep going up. So what pays out today, actually, that 50k pension pot may pay out £200 a month now, but in 10 years, it'll pay out less again, because people are living longer. So the annuities companies, which are basically, it's an insurance, has to then adjust their model because they can't afford to pay you that. Now, 50k and £200 per month is abysmal, but unfortunately, most people have less than that. So you can see the problem. And people are only going to live longer and longer and longer. That's great. That's good news. We finally found some good news, Rob. People are living longer. But the problem is, and you have to accept that for most people, they will have to work a lot longer because people are living longer. Pensions, as they have been, the model, the old system doesn't work. But we've kind of touched on that, Rob. We're working off old systems and measures to try and work in a new age. But the problem is, a lot of people don't even know we're in this new age. And even those ones that do are still trying to work on these old systems and measures to try and sort out retirement.
Yeah, and as a result, most people don't know this is happening. Most people don't know this is a thing because, who's going to tell you? For a start, like we said, no individual government has much incentive to really promote this. It's not a big vote winner to go, you are all screwed. You need to be doing something radically different. It's just, there's no incentive there at all. Doing auto enrollment or something like that is fine. This guy, it looks like a positive thing and that sounds good, but there's not going to be a vote winner to force people to do what they really need to do. Most people aren't getting it from their parents because their parents grew up in a different world. They don't know what's going on. People aren't getting it at school. There is just a complete lack of education around this topic. And that's the problem. There is no incentive. I would bet that this episode is going to be a lot less popular. Probably when we look at the stats, we're going to have fewer people listening to this than one of our cheerier episodes because of the kind of the head in the sand effect. And this is a real issue. And even people who are supposedly professionals in this field, Rob, are not immune to this.
Yeah, because one, I don't think actually all IFAs know. In fact, I know they don't know because I can tell you a story. I did a talk on a pension crisis a few years ago. This was a real passion point for me until I realised that not everyone's that interested. As Rob said, they put their head in the sand. However, I talked about the pension crisis, and it was at a general networking meeting. It wasn't at a property meeting. And at the end, lots of people thanked me for it, and as they do. And an IFA came up to me, and he said, "You're scaremongering." And I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, the FTSE won't always be bad. And I didn't know what to say. I was like, wow, if he really thinks the pension crisis is here because the FTSE's not doing too well at the moment, then not only is he screwed, but all his clients are as well. Because if he doesn't understand the greater thing that's happening here, then that's really worrying. Now, of course, there are far more switched on IFAs out there as well. But the challenge that they have is, if they really tell you how bad it is, you probably might think about doing different things. It's not really in their interest to highlight how horrific, and we have to use words like horrific, things are. Because if they tell you, yes, you can do all these things, and realistically, I can get you retired by 80, that's probably not what you want to hear. So it's not in the government's interests. It's not in the switched on IFAs, financial advisors' interests. So if it's not being taught at schools, governments aren't telling you, financial advisors aren't telling you. Besides us, Rob, who's left to tell you that it's really, really, really bad? But unfortunately, it's not a sexy topic, and people aren't taking the initiative to make this known.
No, then the thing is, there is actually a lot that you can do. It just involves having a completely different approach from what doing in the past. And, that shouldn't be a surprise. Like, some people now are going to be having a retired life almost as long as their working life. So do you really think that sort of saving up 10% of your income is going to do the job for that and have the same standard of living? It just makes no logical sense at all. Yet, if you don't think about it, you can just keep on doing the default. And there's loads that you can do. Obviously, people are turning to property as a pension because of the fact that pensions have not performed very well. Property is a completely valid thing to invest in. You can get better returns from property by using leverage and by buying well and all that kind of thing, which can drastically speed up your progress. But it's not the only thing to do. Obviously, we are pro-property. But there's a movement called early retirement. I'll link to a blog on this subject because I'm interested in it. I don't agree with a lot of the way that people go about it, but I'll link to a site that gives you a really good chart on this. But essentially, the gist of it is if you save 10% of your income and you assume certain kind of average stock market savings rates, then you need to work for something like 40 odd years in order to have an income in retirement that's equal to your income at the point at which you start paying in. As you up that savings rate, the time that you need to get to that retirement figure comes down dramatically, up to the point where if you're saving up 75% of your income, then you could be retired in a single digit number of years. Now, I said I don't agree with all of it because I think you could actually do a lot better than that. The assumption is that you just need to kind of keep squirreling the money away in the markets. And like I said, with things like property, you can actually do far, far better. But if you combine those two things, you can get to something really powerful. And when I say savings, I don't mean just like putting it in the bank until you've got a really impressive looking bank balance. I mean investing it. I think you can invest it in far more active and successful ways. Combine these two things and end up doing seriously well. But the fact is, you've got to take personal responsibility and you've got to do something different from what people have always done in the past, because the goal that we're aiming at is completely different from what it's been in the past.
It has, and you touched on a point there about savings, Rob, but I think this is another problem we have, and we've got to be conscious here because this is a podcast and we could go on for hours, but the society as a whole, we spend, not save. So you said you're not a fan of just saving and basic savings, and I agree. I'm not. I like to save to invest, but people don't even do the saving part. So many people will spend. So not only are they oblivious to how bad things are, but then they don't do even the basics of just saving, which is still an old school mantra. But they're not even doing the old school stuff. They're doing their new approach, but it's not a sensible new approach. It's live for today, max out everything you earn, live a very on the outside flash lifestyle. But if you look in financially, you're hollow. There's nothing there, and you're screwed. And I'm sorry, that's you are. And don't come for a beer with Rob and I because you know where it's going to go. But these are the type of things we talk about off air. It's really worrying, and it's going to take a dramatic shake-up. But, Rob used the word time bomb, but so many people are walking blind into an absolutely huge ticking pensions time bomb. And for some, they don't know it, and for some, I don't think they care. They just live for today. It's worrying, but there we go. Should we sum up, Rob?
Yes, if we just quickly recap the key stats, just in case you're still not persuaded. 80% of people who bought annuities in 2013 had a pension pot of less than £50,000. Only 4% had more than £125,000. 60% of people are going to be wholly reliant on the state pension. Final salary pensions are dead. There's a rude word in the show notes, which I'm not going to repeat, but the gist of it is that 65 is no longer going to be a realistic retirement age if you're under 50 at the moment. You can expect to work probably into your 80s unless you do something about it now. There are lots of things that you can do about it. We'll put some links into the show notes. It doesn't have to be property. Of course it doesn't. But for a lot of people, it can be. And you're probably, if you're listening to this, thinking that it could be part of the mix for you. And it links rather nicely into next week's topic, which we will reveal very shortly. But I think, Rob, we've got to put ourselves back from the brink here with an iTunes review.
We have. Just to say, as an endpoint, if you're scared, you should be. That was the point of the podcast, because there isn't enough people trying to shake people up and go, listen, this is how bad things are. But the thing is, you're listening to the podcast. So now you're educated. So now you can take action. And you probably already are, because people who listen to the podcast tend to be doers. So you probably are taking action or plan to. So don't, go and cry into your cornflakes now. Be glad that you know how bad it is. Try and tell people who are receptive to this and do something about it. So be happy. I know it's hard to have to listen to all that, but be happy that actually you're choosing that not to be the outcome for you. And just try and help the people you can who don't understand these things. Maybe pass this particular episode on. If they've got no interest in property, maybe just pass this episode on to them to help them realise what's going on so they can make informed decisions. And then you've done your part. If they choose to then continue to bury their heads in the sand, then that's up to them. But at least you know you gave them a chance. Let's bring things back up to a cheerier level with a review, as Rob said. And this one comes in from Carl, and I remember meeting Carl, and Carl was very complimentary about the podcast. I met him at the St Albans meetup, and he told me how wonderful it was and how great and how much he enjoyed it and how much he listened to them back to back. And I was like, oh, well, I guess you've left a 5-star review then. And he said, no. I was like, what? I said, right, I'm not listening to any more until you go and leave a review. You promised me you leave a review. And I can see he has. So thank you, Carl. And he wrote, great meetup last night at St Albans, really relaxed atmosphere, very laid back and interesting property conversations with people from different backgrounds. It was also great to meet Rob and put a face to the voice, which has constantly been in my ears for a while. Great work, guys, and thank you for providing us with awesome podcast platform, which is informative and enjoyable to listen to. So thank you, Carl. I hope you're still enjoying the podcasts, and it was great to meet you at the St Albans meetup a few months ago.
Okay, it might have been a doom-laden episode, but that doesn't mean that we're going to let you go without a resource of the week. Now, a few weeks ago, I talked about Brain FM, which is something that I use to help me concentrate. It puts together a soundtrack for you, which is supposed to, in some way that I don't fully understand, supposedly backed by science, help you get your brain into the state to concentrate. And I find that works really well for me. But Rob, you've got a slightly more lo-fi way of achieving the same thing.
Well, I heard this mentioned on the Tim Ferriss podcast in the last few months and realised I'd been doing it for a while anyway. I find a track without music and I will listen to it on repeat over and over again. And it helps me zone out. Sometimes when you listen to music in the background, you can end up listening to the lyrics of the song and losing your concentration or losing your flow. But I just listen. I've got 2 or 3 tracks that I just listen to over and over again. I've just got them on YouTube. I'll link to one of them in the show notes. One of them is actually the Inception soundtrack by Hans Zimmer. It's an hour repeat. Sounds dull. It's not one you want to play at a party. But if you just want to get stuff done, you've got a big to-do list and you just want to crunch through some work, I find it really, really effective, actually. Very effective. I can highly recommend it. I also listen to the Social Network soundtrack all the way through as well. I find that very useful. And Focus at Will is another one. I've got an hour-long focus track there from the guys at Focus and Will on YouTube. So whichever track you choose, it doesn't really matter. Just choose one without words. I think that's important. Have it on loop. And then just try it. It might not work really well the first couple of times, but I think you'll find you'll become very effective very quickly.
And as an added bonus, if you do it out loud rather than having it in your headphones, your colleagues or your family might think that you've gone mad and leave you alone to get on with your work. And they'll just wonder why you're listening to the same song over and over again. Might buy you some peace and quiet. Right, next week, as I said, ties quite nicely into what we were talking about this week. Next week, we're going to be talking about, is property investment still a good idea? And this is something which has been coming up over and over again in the conversations I've had recently, because there's been all the changes that there have been and sentiment is perhaps shifting. Is property investment still a good idea? Was it something that worked for a period of time and now it's not going to anymore? Should it be part of your planning if you want to get your pension sorted or if you want to have a second income or a career change now? Is property investment still a good idea? The answer will be no, and next week is our last episode ever. No, that's not true. I won't spoil it, but that is going to be our topic next week.
Okay, so everyone go and listen to some happy music. Cheer yourselves up. Remember, it's not that bad. You know what's wrong, so you can go out and fix it. We hope you found this episode useful. It's a little unusual for ourselves, but it's important. It's linked to wealth, and I think it's important that everyone understands it. But as Rob said, next week we're back on track. So we're back on Tuesday with Ask Rob and Rob, and then of course back with the main property podcast next Thursday. So until then, everyone, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the Property Podcast. For show notes, all our past episodes, and to leave a review, go to thepropertyhub.net/podcast.